Welcome to Amazing Kids. I'm Dr. Jennifer Hensley, pediatric nurse practitioner and co-founder of Amazing Kids. I previously led a large-scale, evidence-based autism evaluation team, and during the 2020 pandemic, we watched the future of autism diagnostics change in real time and for the better. Kids with autism are amazing, and we are excited to show you how virtual diagnostics can help move children quickly towards success in the real world. At Amazing Kids, we partner with nurse practitioners and clinicians across the United States who share our belief that how autism is diagnosed matters just as much as when. For decades, autism diagnosis relied on in-person observation in clinical settings. But today, advances in virtual care allow us to observe children in their natural home environments, capturing real-world behaviors and interactions that were not accessible even 5 years ago. We believe in a future with no wait lists for diagnosis, where children are evaluated in their own safe spaces, families receive clarity sooner, and kids are supported early so they can build skills, confidence, and independence. Our goal is simple: to help children with autism live full and meaningful lives with confidence, autonomy, independence, and self-direction, and to equip nurse practitioners with best practices for collecting the highest value data possible to strengthen diagnostic accuracy. In this Autism Playbook series, our focus is helping families build the strongest possible team for their child. You will meet children and young adults who are thriving with autism, hear from parents who have moved through grief into advocacy and long-term planning, and learn from subject matter experts who are leading best practices for supporting independence at every stage.
Good afternoon. I'm Simone Olson. I am co-founder of Amazing Kids with Dr. Jennifer Hensley, and we are so excited to have you join us today. As Dr. Hensley mentioned, today is our very first ever webinar, and we're excited to have you join us. Autism diagnosis has historically been in person, and many families have been taught that long wait lists equal quality and that faster options must be cutting corners. I'm joined today, as we discussed, and as you've heard from Dr. Jennifer Hensley, a pediatric nurse practitioner with over 20 years of experience supporting children with autism and leading multidisciplinary diagnostic teams. Jennifer has worked inside traditional systems and helped design the virtual model we use today, one that removes unnecessary delays without lowering clinical standards. This conversation is educational, informational. It does not create a provider-patient relationship. Families should always consult licensed professionals for individualized guidance. For our opening question, Dr. Hensley, when families or professionals first hear virtual autism diagnosis, what concerns do you hear most often, and why do you think those concerns exist?
Simone, thanks for that question. So, virtual autism diagnostics, I think the biggest fear that people have is that their child is not going to get a good assessment. I think that fear is also there for kids getting in-person assessments. I would say a good part of the medical community doesn't really know what an autism assessment is. And so how in the world are our families going to know that what a true comprehensive autism assessment is? And then when you add the layer of virtual, I think since COVID, most people are very comfortable with even doing virtual medical appointments. But it's a long visit. Here at Amazing Kids, we allot 120 minutes for each assessment. And so I think, again, the fear that their child's not going to get a thorough assessment might be one fear. And then, with this diagnosis, there's just a lot of fear in general. I think a lot of kids are suffering and parents don't really know who to turn to and what to do to get their children evaluated. So sometimes it's a matter of not wanting them to get the evaluation or not feeling comfortable moving forward with an assessment, not realizing that there could be a 1 to 2 year wait list to even get the assessment.
So to expand on that, what behaviors matter most in an autism diagnosis, and how are they reliably observed in a virtual setting?
Yeah, so the behaviors that matter most are all behaviors, right? And so autism truly is a clinical diagnosis. So what is that child doing? How are they interacting? How do they interact with their loved ones, their pets, right? And so with a virtual diagnosis, I get all of that observation up front. The child is in their natural environment. There's no stress. They haven't been loaded in the car seat, traveled long distance. Some parents will travel 2 to 4 hours to get these assessments, especially if they're in rural areas. So it's important to make sure that the child is natural and feeling like themselves. So in a physical office, when a child comes in, they've gone through that whole visit trying to get themselves to the hospital or the medical clinic they're being evaluated in. And then they have to get vital signs and they're in a loud environment with bright sounds and bright noises. It takes them a good 20 to 30 minutes to settle down in that physical appointment. With a virtual assessment, we've eliminated all of that because the child is in their home and their natural environment. And so we need to monitor again how the child is interacting with their loved ones, with their family pets, with their favorite toys, with their environment around them. And then what do they do for fun? Like kids play. That's what kids do. And so children with autism play too. It might look a little bit different than a typical child. And so what are they doing in their free time? And again, how are they engaging with other people is very important to monitor.
Thanks for that answer. I think very often, when we're talking about virtual evaluations versus in person, I think sometimes the idea of speed versus quality comes up in the conversation. Why are speed and rigor or quality not opposites or mutually exclusive? How does Amazing Kids maintain clinical integrity while reducing these wait times?
Yeah, so I would say waiting 1 to 2 years, the speed of getting in for the appointment is absolutely unacceptable. You shouldn't have to wait 1 to 2 years to get any kind of health care. And unfortunately, that is where we are. Just about every clinic out there has some kind of a wait list across the country. And so the speed of access to care, currently, we are in an absolute healthcare crisis. With virtual assessments, we cut down the speed. Not only are parents cutting down costs because they're not traveling, they're not wasting gas money, but the speed is with which we can get them in for the appointment is much faster. Because again, we at Amazing Kids are just focusing on autism diagnostics. And so it's important to get the child in quickly. The rigor of the evaluation is going to be the same. So we value parent input, which I know is going to be our next question as well. And so that rigor is going to be parents filling out paperwork and then having a clinician that has the experience and the skill set to do the formal, full, comprehensive medical evaluation. And so the combination of all of that is what we come to get a formal diagnosis. Now, one other thing I want to add here, Simone, is that many clinics break this appointment up into 2 or 3 steps. So it's not unusual for me. I was actually talking with a parent yesterday, and she said she had her first visit to get her intake. Her second visit was a month later for her child to have the evaluation. And the third visit was actually hey, your child has autism. And it took 3 to 4 months after she had already waited that 1 to 2 years to have her child evaluated to get a diagnosis. We at Amazing Kids believe that is not necessary. Once the parent engages with Amazing Kids and they are ready for the assessment, they get sent the developmental testing. They complete that all online, takes about 2 hours, and then we get them scheduled within 72 hours to see a clinician. And by the end of that appointment, they're going to know exactly what their child's medical diagnosis is and a plan moving forward. So we don't believe in extending out the assessment process because really and truly after that second visit, when the provider has all the initial intake and testing and has evaluated the child, they know the answer to the question. So why make families wait?
And also, I imagine it would just, cut down completely on the stress of that whole process. If you can do it in 72 hours versus 3 months, that's a huge load off of the parents' shoulders. And as you mentioned, the next question was about parents. How do you interpret caregiver input clinically, and why is it essential rather than a source of bias?
And Simone, I have always practiced this way. The parent is in charge. The parent is in charge of the coach's team. Doesn't matter what the child has diagnosed or not diagnosed. The parent is in charge. They know their child better than anybody else. And when the parent has concerns, I have concerns. And I may be the healthcare provider and the clinician, but my clinical evaluation is directly related to the parent's input and their concerns for their child. And so I want to build a team from that first minute that parents engage with me because they are critical for this child's team. I can give, 100 diagnoses, and if 99 parents don't activate the team and get a team set up for their kids, those 99 kids aren't going to do well. They need a good, solid coach for their team. And so parents are absolutely critical. And so once we give the diagnosis, it's important to really help the parent develop the team.
Thank you for that. I think that it's just so important to emphasize that parents are really, the coaches of this team, and they will be for, a long time until the child is able to take over as coach for themselves. Autism itself is just such a complex issue and diagnosis. What truly requires physical presence in diagnosis, if any, and what does not?
Well, Simone, you're right. Autism is a very complicated neurodevelopmental disorder. And as I said earlier, a lot of clinicians don't understand autism. A lot of, not healthcare providers, I should say, people in healthcare don't understand autism. And so, because it's such a complicated neurodevelopmental disorder, and of course, every person with autism is different, um, do we require to see them physically? Right. So, again, but 5 years ago, I would have said, yes, I have to see this child. I have to have hands on him. I have to engage with him. But I have learned, and many other clinicians have learned, that virtual assessments are, I would say, even more valuable than in-person assessments. So there is not a time where I would choose a physical assessment over a I would choose a physical assessment over a virtual assessment. But there are some kids that one assessment or one visit is not enough. So we might have to bring them back and spend more time with. So I would say what's more important is the amount of time we spend with the child, and not if we're physically in person or virtual. It is perfectly acceptable to do an in-person visit and evaluation for a child with autism. The purpose of Amazing Kids is to not rule out physical assessments, but the purpose of Amazing Kids is to prove that virtual is just as valuable, if not more beneficial, because again, the child is in their comfort zone, their home, natural environment. So we're not taking them into an artificial environment and expecting them to show me who they are when I've brought all kinds of other variables into the assessment.
Thank you for that thorough explanation. Now let's just segue a little bit and talk about schools, since almost every autism diagnosis is going to have a personal implication, but also is going to have a school implication for most children. What should families understand about documentation, validity, and real world use of virtual diagnosis
Yeah,
in relation to how it works at schools?
I want to take a step back a little bit, Simone, since you brought up the schools. It's important. So medical evaluations and school evaluations are completely separate. And so the medical evaluation is going to open the door for a person's healthcare benefit and getting medical services outside of school. The school evaluation is going to open the door for school-based support services. And so they're independent of one another and not defined by one another. And so whenever a parent is seeking an autism evaluation, it's important for the parent to, number one, know who's evaluating their child. There's many times where I've had parents say, oh yeah, we got an evaluation years ago and we need a new evaluation. And they have no idea the clinician's name, the clinician's credentials, who evaluated their child. So the family needs to understand who's evaluating their child, what their abilities are, and they should be getting a full report. They should try to understand the testing that was conducted on their child. And really, the clinician needs to provide time with the parent to really educate the parent on the diagnosis and the treatment plan. So having a full report to share with the school system, to share with therapists, to share with whoever is going to be in that child's team, because again, the parent needs to build a team for the child, and they need to understand all the steps that got the child to that point.
Good point. So obviously, if you're doing virtual diagnostic evaluations, then technology is going to have, a huge role in the whole process. How does technology support, not replace, clinical judgment at Amazing Kids?
Yeah, so technology saves time. There's a huge cost and time savings. Families save money on gas, childcare, taking time off work, and increased accessibility. So easier evaluations, a lot more flexibility. Technology can connect families in rural and underserved areas. I actually had a colleague contact me again from overseas, and she wanted to know, hey, like, I'm in Germany. I have so many patients here that can't get assessments. Like, can Amazing Kids come to Germany? So we can touch these areas and, get these kids the assessments. I hadn't thought about expanding internationally. Right now, we're looking at a national expansion. But again, these kids are out there and they can't get the proper assessments. And then I think technology can also improve parent and clinician collaboration. We're all used to using the internet. We're all used to using email, and we're already doing a virtual assessment. So the door is already open for the parent to communicate with us this way versus a physical appointment. you're not quite sure how to get back in touch with the clinician. So there's a lot of benefits to using technology to advance healthcare in children with autism.
Wow, that would be really great for Amazing Kids to expand out into Germany and other places in Europe. That'd be quite kind of fun.
Maybe that would be a business trip for us.
I
What do you
know it might have to be, to check out just, certain things, I would think. How do you ensure families feel supported and guided through a diagnosis that can be so emotionally heavy?
Yeah, so this is the hard part of the diagnosis. So I always like my families to know that unlike other chronic diagnoses that we receive for our children, there's a grieving process that parents have to go through. And especially if the parent has known something's been wrong with their child, but they keep getting told everything's okay, everything's okay, everything's okay, until somebody tells them, hey, your child has autism. It really, a lot of parents, I would say at this point, feel pretty abandoned by all the healthcare providers and teams that have seen the child all through all these years because why didn't my pediatrician pick this up? Or why didn't, we went here, we went to the emergency room, nobody said anything. Like, why did it take so long for all these people to, let me know that something was wrong with my child? It's a tough discussion. I've talked to many teachers. I've talked to many community experts, and nobody wants to say the word autism because they're fearful of what the reaction is going to be from the parent. And so it's important to, again, just know that with a diagnosis, the parents have to go through the grieving process. It's the same process that we go through when we lose a loved one, and we have to get to the point of acceptance. So once you have acceptance, then you can put your coach's hat on and coach the best team that you can for your child. But if you're going to stay in denial, that's not my child doesn't have autism, then that's not a healthy place for you or your child to be, because we don't have much time to get that child set up for success. So even if they're 10 years old, we only got 8 years left till they're an adult. So we got to work really hard to get them those tools for success. So just understanding as a parent, you are going to go through the grieving process, and that's okay. Let yourself grieve, and you're going to grieve different than your spouse and grandparents and siblings, and everybody needs to be afforded to go through that grieving process on their time. But at the end of the day, it's going to be okay. The child's going to be okay. The parents are going to be okay. The child's going to be better than okay because they have an autism brain. And so we just have to, again, give them the right tools to get them set up.
Thank you for that. I think it's just we have one more question for you, but I think this whole session just has been really highlighting, the virtual versus in-person diagnostic evaluation has just been really supportive. If you could change one belief parents or professionals hold about autism diagnosis today, what would it be and why?
Autism is amazing. Like I said, I have the most amazing patients in the world. Their brains are wired different. They're not broken. They're amazing. We just have to give them the right tools. And so that fear, I want to eliminate that fear. I want to empower parents. I want to empower kids. Once that kid takes that coach's hat, Simone, as you had mentioned earlier, the parent's going to coach the team until the child takes the team. Once the child takes a hold of their team, move aside, everybody, because they are going to build the best team that they can for themselves and get themselves set up for success. So I love Temple Grandin. If you haven't, have you heard of Temple Grandin before, Simone?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, so she
I've
has
talked about her.
a wonderful quote that says, the one thing I love about having autism is I'm in a play. I learn every day and I get better and better every day. I feel confident that children with autism, people with autism, can learn to overcome a lot of the clinical characteristics that come along with autism. And so they just have to learn to be common. I don't want to change them. I don't want to change their personalities, but I have to help them, give them the tools to assimilate in society. So if we can give them the tools, we'll get them set up for success.
Thank you for all that great insight. I think that you have such a great and refreshing attitude and perspective on autism and treating autism, and that these kids are just so amazing and can go on and do amazing things and be independent and become the coaches of their life, which is just such an exciting idea. We have a question, Jen, from Jamie. How many states are you providing services for currently?
Oh, Jamie, that's a great question. So currently we're based out of Florida and we're brand new. We have only been open for a few weeks here. So we are hoping to expand quite rapidly. So currently we are just in Florida, but let me know where you are so we can reach out to your neck of the woods because there's lots of kids everywhere that need to get our care. Thanks for your question.
Sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the chat. Give me 1 second.
I can
Do you
see it.
have some patient stories you can share?
Oh, I have so many patient stories. So I just completed my book. Let me bring it a little bit closer so you can see it. This is the Autism Playbook. In this book, I have 3 amazing families. I actually invited them super last minute today, so they aren't able to come on. Of 3 kids that I saw that, I mean, my goal for my patients, and I know I stress out my families a little bit, is for them to function at the top of their ability. I'm not going to put a ceiling on you because you have autism. And my goal is for you to have all your dreams and wishes come true in life like everybody else. And so I'm hard on them, right? So families will come in and say, okay, we're doing this, this, and this now. And I'll be like, okay, now we got to do this, this, and this. Because if your child has autism and has an average IQ, then the goal is going to be independence, average or above average IQ. If they have been identified as having lower cognitive abilities, then we address that and we still force that highest level of independence. But if there's at least an average IQ, the goal is going to be independence someday. And so I have a patient right now who is my pride and joy, one of my patients, and he just left for college. He's 20 years old. And I started caring for him when he was 13 years old. And his mom looked at me and said, I just don't know if he's ever going to be on his own. And he has moved across the country and went to college.
Amazing.
He's an Eagle Scout. And he could hardly answer, how was your day, when I first met him. And so they need a lot of confidence building, and they need to know that they can build that team. And a 13-year-old, I'm going to be all of my patients really, but my 13-year-olds, I'm really talking to you. I'm not talking to your parents. This is your life. I have another one of my patients in my book, and they've given me full permission to share their stories. I started caring for him and diagnosed him when he was 3, and he's 9 now. He was brilliant at 3 in reading, but the school was trying to put him in special education because of his behavior. And so now he is in 2nd grade, and he is an advanced curriculum, and he's learning multiple languages, and he teaches me something every time I see him. These kids, we just have to access them, and they are going to be accessed a little bit different than other kids. So I have so many success stories. But the thing that's important about the autism diagnosis is autism comes along with other diagnoses, like many other diagnoses, and we have to address all of them. So if there's an ADHD, if there's an anxiety, if there's insomnia, if there's constipation, it's important for us to address all of these healthcare needs so we can bring down all these walls and help these kids function at the top of their ability.
Great. Well, we got another one.
Says, do you see Savannah's question? I'm sorry, Simone. I didn't want to miss her. Do you see Savannah's question?
That's the one I was just going to go to. Yeah. This question is from Savannah. You mentioned the value in evaluating children in the comfort of their own home, especially related to how they interact with siblings or pets. However, siblings and pets could also be a distraction, or the child could have difficulty engaging through a screen. How do you navigate these additional factors that may hinder engagement?
That's a great question. And I do get that question oftentimes. Parents like, how do I keep them on the screen, or how do I get them to interact with you? They really don't have to interact with me. I mean, as a clinician, I always get them to interact with me, but they really don't have to. I need to see how they interact with their families. So I welcome pets. I think that's one of the most exciting things about doing these evaluations. I get to meet everybody's pet. I've met chickens. I had one patient that had 13 chickens, and she had them all named, and she brought me outside and introduced me to every one of her chickens. I've met iguanas, I've met birds, I've met, of course, dogs and cats, snakes, I think I even met. And so that gives me a lot of data points. How is this child taking care of that pet? Do they care about this pet's needs? Are they appropriate with their pet? Are they not appropriate? And same thing with siblings. Siblings have a heavy burden in this situation because, especially if they're an older sibling, and parents don't really like to talk to older siblings, and it might only be like a 5-year-old sibling with a 2-year-old who has autism. The 5-year-old worries about the 2-year-old. And so it's very important to engage that 5-year-old and educate them. They know something's wrong with their younger brother, but they don't know what, and they know he's not like their friends' younger brothers. And so siblings it's critical to address that as well. So that gives me the opportunity to even open that door with the child. And I actually, when I have siblings in the visit, I ask them too, are you worried about your little brother? Tell me what you see. Oh yeah, he just sits there and he opens the door. That's all he does is open and close the door. I can't get him to play with toys with me. I can't get him, I hurt myself and he didn't even seem to care that I hurt myself. Like that's hard. And so that gives, again, a lot of data points. So thank you for that question, Savannah. It can be, parents can feel intimidated because of that, but I welcome it. Because again, I'm looking for social interactions and I'm looking for rigid behaviors with autism. And so it gives me additional data points when I have additional people that are involved in the visit and pets as well.
Wow. Yeah, great question, Savannah. We have another one in the chat. Are parents having to pay out of pocket for these virtual assessments, or are the providers credentialed with insurances for this to take the same course of insurance billing as an in-person evaluation?
So currently we are not taking insurance, and at this point there's no plan for us to take insurance, but we do provide a super bill for parents to submit to their insurance themselves, which our parents have definitely appreciated and taken advantage of. So we'll give them all the coding and the treatment plan, the diagnostic test, so they can see everything that was done and send that to their insurance company. Thank you for that question.
Another question. Allison says she's not very familiar with autism, but is there any type that can be so served that the child person is unreachable, especially online?
So sometimes the kids don't interact with the camera. The requirement for the family is just that the child is on the camera. And so, and I would say worst case scenario, I turn my video off so the child doesn't see me. And the parent just pops the video up on the side of the room so that I can observe the child interacting with the family. Of course, my voice still needs to be on. I need to communicate with the parent. But I will say I've never had a child. I had maybe two children with selective mutism, many children with that, but two that just absolutely refused to talk, but still able to engage once we turn the camera off. And then anxiety can be another big factor if the kids are really anxious of being on camera themselves. But I will say, unfortunately, most kids spend a lot of time on screens throughout their education now since COVID. And so screens aren't as intimidating as they used to be. But I really haven't had any struggle ever getting a child on camera, except for those like one or two very unusual situations.
Great.
I will
Thank you so much
caveat
for that
that. Oh,
answer.
I'm sorry, I'm going to add one more thing, Simone.
No, sure. Go for it.
With also, I've probably had more kids that refuse to come into the healthcare clinic. I've evaluated kids in the courtyard outside of my healthcare clinic previously. I've evaluated kids in their cars because they wouldn't leave the car. So I would say probably getting them into the physical location has been a lot more challenging for me than getting them into on the video in their home environment.
Great. Thank you so much for that. We have another question. Why can we expect more to be diagnosed more than just with autism alone? Also, why is a diagnosis a critical first step, especially for a caregiver who may be waiting for their child to grow out of certain behaviors?
So when you have behavior disorders, it's pretty unusual for them to come by themselves. So it's just important for us, with Amazing Kids. So depending on who's doing the evaluation for the child, you might get just a very focused autism assessment and that's it. Since we are medical clinicians, we're nurse practitioners, we're going to do a full medical assessment. And so it's important for us to evaluate, maybe there's a hearing impairment. And that's why the child has these unusual behaviors. They can't hear. But it's important, again, for us to address the entire child. We do feel confident that autism has a genetic component. We have about 1,000 genes associated with autism spectrum disorder, and oftentimes genetic disorders come with many layers. And so it is possible to just have autism spectrum disorder, but more than likely there's autism with a communication disorder, autism with ADHD, autism with intellectual disability, autism with a feeding disorder. So that's the other big part of this is with autism, you have very rigid behaviors. And so those rigid behaviors cause secondary effects. So if I'm only going to eat chocolate covered Pop-Tarts with sprinkles on them, and I did have a patient about 10 years ago, and she was 3 and that's all she ate, and everybody ridiculed the parents for being terrible and that's all they gave their child. Well, if they stopped giving that to her, she ends up on a feeding tube. So those parents had great intuition to know that they needed to give her chocolate covered Pop-Tarts with sprinkles. And so that is a very restrictive feeding disorder. And of course, she's limited on nutrients. And so we have to address these other secondary effects. And so that's why it's common to have these other diagnoses along with autism. The hope is that a lot of these other diagnoses will fall off, like that feeding disorder. Once we get into intensive occupational feeding therapy or speech therapy, we can get to that point where that child does expand their palate and is able to tolerate and welcome other food choices. So again, building that team is important. That's where I would bring an occupational therapist, a nutritionist, and possible speech pathology to make sure that we're addressing those needs directly. Let me see, did I answer all your question? Diagnosis is a critical first step because without a diagnosis, this is how our healthcare system works. I think as clinicians, we would probably rather never give diagnosis because nobody ever wants a formal diagnosis for anything. But even to treat an ear infection, I have to diagnose otitis media before I can give the antibiotics, or else someone's going to tell me I'm not practicing under evidence-based guidelines. So same thing with autism. In order to get intervention, you have to have the diagnosis. And so the assessment is the first step. There's lots of people, again, waiting a long time for these assessments. We are in a nationwide crisis. Every professional organization that cares for children discusses this nationwide crisis that we're in. And so Amazing Kids, again, we're trying to cut that down to 72 hours. So diagnosis is absolutely critical for these kids. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. We have another question from Jamie. Once diagnosis is made, the report is shared with parents and the school, I believe you mentioned, or maybe the parents provide to the school, but how do you refer for services for OT, speech, etc., that may be necessary? And do you find any pushback with therapies or other providers regarding the diagnosis being made virtually versus through one of their clinics, despite the long wait times? It's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have never received any pushback from anybody as far as getting the therapies and interventions. We order all the therapies that are recommended. Yeah, we are a primary care focused clinic, just focusing on these autism diagnostics. But these kids will also have primary care providers. So parents are always welcome to go to their typical primary care provider with the report to get the referrals. But I've actually never gotten kickback from any therapies, clinics, audiology, whoever I'm referring to. I just feel like COVID has really changed our landscape, and these virtual assessments are accepted, especially when they see the report. So here at Amazing Kids, we provide about a 15 to 20 page report. We include all of the testing results and how we came to the finalized diagnosis and treatment plan. So I think as a clinician, when I'm looking at reports, for me, I don't care how the assessment was done, but I do care what was done during that time. And that's what insurances care about. If the correct tests were done, again, there's really no gold standard of tests to complete for an autism diagnosis. Some people say the ADOS is the gold standard of testing. However, the ADOS was actually created for research. What the ADOS does is it affords 90 minutes with direct patient intervention playing, but we can collect all that data using other diagnostic scales that don't require me to be face-to-face with the patient. So never had any kickback and seems to be welcomed. Again, the primary care teams are often strapped for time. They don't have the time to do the assessments. And so we're going to do the assessment for them and give them the tools to help them get their patients set up for success. So it really seems to be welcomed by all.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other, there's another question just popped in. Is there any harm in waiting until 5 or so? How would you recommend one parent get their spouse on board if they're not in agreement regarding a need for an assessment?
Oh, Jenna, that's such a great question.
Good question.
This is such an emotional diagnosis, and not everybody's ready. It's hard. I mean, there's lots of things that parents have done to get their other parent on board. At the end of the day, our children are our responsibility, and I'll just talk to you more as a parent. At the end of the day, our children are our responsibility, and only you can be the one to get them the assessment. So if one parent is on board and another parent is not on board, education is very important, trying to find all the resources that you can. I have had lots of parents bring their kids to me and say, my spouse doesn't want me to be doing this. I always say, bring the spouse to the appointment. The skeptical parent should always come. And once they see the assessment and talk to the clinician and learn why their child meets the criteria for autism, they come on board. I only had one parent run out of her room screaming at me, her child doesn't have autism. And then she ran right back in the room and she said, but diagnose him because he needs all these services. And then came back to me crying 2 weeks later. And she was a nurse. And sometimes us nurses are most hard on ourselves and our kids. And the child absolutely was brilliant. And again, I think sometimes when the kids have a very high IQ, can be an even harder diagnosis because my kid is so smart. How can they have autism? Again, autism doesn't mean that there's intellectual disability. There is a higher chance of intellectual disability with autism, but it doesn't mean that there is an intellectual disability. So could we wait until 5? We could, but all the research tells us the younger we diagnose, the better these kids do. So ultimately, I like to get you diagnosed no later than 2 or 3. We can diagnose as young as 1, but if I can get you diagnosed at 2 or 3, my hope is by the time you're in kindergarten, you don't need special education. You're doing general or advanced education and you're set up for success. That's
Very
not to
interesting.
say I can't diagnose you at 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 30. I can't because I'm only pediatrics. But the diagnosis as we get older, sometimes it's just informational. Oh, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Or now I can try to change my behavior because I need to educate myself on autism and then understand why I don't have friends or why I'm having a hard time nailing this interview, or I'm very smart, but I can't get the job because I'm not presenting myself in the manner that I should to welcome people to hire me. And so it's just a matter of, again, learning sometimes. We can diagnose at any age, but the younger, the better.
Well, Jenna's question actually made me think of a question. So, for the virtual evaluations, is it helpful, obviously, to have both parents there if possible, but also to have family members and pets, siblings, or do you want them to sort of, since it is a virtual evaluation, can you have them coming in and out of the appointment? Is it better to have, does it help with data points or making a decision if you have like multiple inputs, I guess, from the entire family?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I always like both parents to be in the room. If that's for me, that's an ideal visit to have both parents and the child. If siblings are there, I always welcome siblings. It's a long visit, and so if it's a infant, that's going to be distractible to the parent. I mean, I'm about to evaluate a child and give a lifelong diagnosis, and I don't want anything to get in the way of that. And if there's an infant there that the parent's trying to tend to, and they walk out an hour and a half later going, my child has autism, like, how did you decide that, right? Because they haven't been able to be as engaged. I always welcome family because I'm very inclusive. But at the end of the day, it's best to have both parents. And then if I have a mature sibling, absolutely. And I do have, and I would say as young as 5, sit there and listen the entire time and participate in the whole visit because they're so worried about their younger sibling. If they're a distraction, if they have their own problems of, paying attention, again, it's a long visit. So I would, need to adjust the visit based on who's there. But I always welcome everybody. I've had lots of grandparents, aunts, uncles. I've had neighbors come to visit, in the visits. Whoever has the concern typically is someone who, wants to be involved. And again, the parents are already building the team. So that's important if that person reassures the parents and that's someone that they're comfortable with. I share a lot of information. So, they tell us that your patients only hear 10% of what you say, which breaks my heart because I talk a lot. But to walk out of a 2-hour visit and only hear 10% of what's being said is, not in the parents' best interest because they're going to lose a lot. So if they choose to bring somebody else that will help them remember some of the information, I always welcome that. Good question.
So we have another question. If a child with autism already has a diagnosis, can you still work with them at Amazing Kids? As an example, if a child is 10 or so and spending most of their day playing video games and never socializing, how is it that a parent would work with you to sort of prepare a child for launch?
Yeah, so Amazing Kids is focused on autism diagnostics. And so I would definitely be willing to reevaluate the child and just verify the autism diagnosis, see if there's any other diagnosis as well, and help develop a treatment plan for that child. Most kids get diagnosed somewhere between 2 and 4 and 5. And then I've heard a lot of parents say, well, we've never gone back to have any further evaluations. They just have autism. But the treatment is important too, which is again why we've started this Autism Playbook seminar series, because I want to empower parents with teamwork. And if their child's playing video games all day at 10, guess what they're going to be doing at 15 and 18 and 25? And, with autism, again, we have social delays and rigid behaviors. And if I'm socially playing video games all day, why would I get a job? Why would I go to school? Why would I be a productive member of society? It just doesn't seem rational to them because they're just going to do what's fun for them. And so that 10-year-old needs to get off those video games and we need to develop a treatment plan. So yes, but we are going to be reevaluating the autism diagnosis and see if there's any other diagnosis that we need to address for that child.
And so could an autism diagnosis change?
So once you have autism, you can never outgrow autism, but you can learn, kind of like what I was saying before with Temple Grandin, you can learn to overcome a lot of the clinical characteristics of autism. So have I removed diagnosis from patients? I have. The evidence-based guidelines say once you have autism, you always have autism. My threshold is if I have like 4 years where this child really doesn't need any intervention and they're successful in everything that they're doing and they are asking for that diagnosis to be removed, I will consider it based on what their initial evaluation was. So oftentimes these kids may have gotten diagnosed by a clinician that did not do a very thorough assessment, and the child has had years of interventions and therapies, and then they don't need anything and they stop them all and they're doing fine. So I kind of question the validity of the early diagnosis. But again, I wasn't there to know that. So at the end of the day, we don't remove diagnosis, but if they've learned to overcome a lot of those clinical characteristics and they're very successful, it's something that can be up for discussion depending on what the patient's needs are. I would say that would be a discussion with the patient, not with the parent. I mean, it has to be something that the patient is seeking out and understands in order to move forward with that formal evaluation.
Thank you for that. Another question, what if our family simply cannot afford to build the proper team? Is it difficult to convince insurance companies to cover certain interventions or specialists? A team sounds expensive.
Yeah, so that is a great question, Jenna. Thanks for asking that. So, my favorite team members are the community. So, here we have children with autism who have developmental delays. We need to assimilate them into society. So, the team can be the local park, the team can be, the local play, right? Like I'm going to go join this theater over here. Kids have to be kids and kids have to assimilate into society. And so the team doesn't need to be a complex team of expensive people. There, of course, are your therapy team. You have your school personnel. So like therapy can be speech and OT and ABA, and those can all be expensive copays, but none of them by themselves should be the main player. The parent and the child is the main player. And so you have to build that team surrounding medical. I mean, maybe the child has a hearing impairment, so they're going to have to go to the audiologist if they need hearing aids, right? Or maybe that child has, who knows, all kinds of whatever medical. Maybe they have a lot of feeding issues and they need to go to the gastroenterologist. Like that stuff, we're not going to cut any corners. School, you're going to have your school personnel. So maybe we're in special education, maybe we're not. Maybe we're in advanced education. Maybe we need to just have the counselor check in on your child depending on how they're doing on the playground. Are they making friends, right? So the team is going to adjust based on what the child's needs are. And then you have your advocacy groups. Those are super cheap, right? We don't pay anything for advocacy groups. There's lots of advocacy groups across the country. Like, how do we engage them? They have free social skills groups. A lot of the movie theaters will have sensory-friendly movies. My church has a sensory-friendly mass service. So those are team players. And then again, just being in the community. Kids need to be around other kids. Like a typical 2-year-old has friends. They go to daycare. They know the kid they like to be around. They get their toy. They sit next to the other kid playing with a similar toy. And that's who they like to be with, right? A typical 3-year-old can group play, can take turns. You be this guy, I'll be that guy. You go here, I'll go there. We have to give these kids the chance to make friends and be in the community. So I like to get them out of therapy as soon as possible and integrate them as much as possible into the community, which oftentimes is free if you're at the playground, or, can even have reduced rates depending on the availability of like any kind of adaptive sports, or a lot of the nonprofits, again, will do a lot of free services as well. So education is important as well as the interaction with other peers in the community. So lots of ways to do things without spending a lot of money. And the playbook actually covers that as well. That's the whole basis on the autism playbook, is that I want to teach parents how to build this team, and I teach them who all the players are. And it's important to not neglect the community teammates. Although a lot of parents do, because these kids can be in therapy 40 plus hours a week and nobody has time for anything, including family time.
Thanks for all of that. Again, great insight. It looks like there are no additional questions in the chat. So thank you everyone for being here today. As we mentioned, it's our first inaugural webinar. So we appreciate all of the amazing questions and just the support today. What a great session. I think that it really, Jen, or Dr. Hensley, you have really kind of outlined for us just the benefits of a virtual evaluation and all of the great things that Amazing Kids can do for these amazing kids and their families. Thank you.